This is unbelievable. My people want to turn me into a piñata just to watch the masses beat me into oblivion. There must be a better end for me. We got the patron request from Buttery. He says, so we all know the people of the Fate Stay Night community are begging for an Ilya route, a Medea route, even a dedicated Medusa route. I, however, think greater than that. How would a Shinji route look? By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. So admittedly, this is the first time that I've ever gave this thought to this extent, because for all intents and purposes, in my mind, it's always been considered impossible just by the way that Shinji's written. But I would try to bargain with the overall premise. Shinji is put in a weird space in Fate Stay Night, and I've always felt this way about his character. There's never been anything redeemable about his character. When you go through the story, and not just Shinji's story, but the arc of any character in general, you want to find something, at least I do, something that would remotely resemble a reason for you to root for that character. And if you can't find a reason to root for that character, you can at least look at them from a bird's eye view. Well, I can't get down with their ideals, but I understand why. Shinji isn't necessarily given either. Throughout the entirety of the Fate Stay Night story, he has always been used as a ploy. It just gets worse and worse and worse. I made the argument before years ago on how he's a great character from a villain perspective. I mean, how could he not be? The story goes out of his way to make him as vile as possible. Each route pretty much descending a little more than the one before. But this is a very unrealistic case for pretty much anybody that you could possibly think of, and that's been made very apparent with the characters out of FGO. In the Fate route, we see his wrongdoings get him completely smashed into pieces by Heracles. In the UB Dub route, which is crazy to think of, but his most redeemable arc, you still have the idea of him preying on Ren, and also what we find from the later routes that he's been preying on Sakura the entire time. And then you see him end up getting turned into the Grail vessel and him looking more pathetic than ever, just a little more pathetic than vile. That's what you leave with, but at the very least, he survives. All for him to get saved by Ren anyway, so if there was any redeemable qualities to be given, it would be given to the girl that actually had the decency to save the guy that entertained the idea of preying on her, which realistically wouldn't happen 95% of the time. And then there's Heaven's Field, where everything reaches ahead and we find out about the worst half of Shinji, where on top of everything that Sakura has been going through in her past, he's also been preying on her this entire time to hash out all the things that he had going on in his background as some form of dominance and as some form of competence, at least in his eyes. It is the most despicable thing ever, and again, it kind of just plays into the hand of, yes, he's a great villain, but with what you gave him throughout the entirety of the story, how could he not be? He's always this, he's never anything else. As a matter of fact, I find a hard time even looking at him as a real character as opposed to a plot device for everybody else in the story, because that's pretty much what he always is. He's somebody to get out the way, he's somebody to stir up some trouble, his motivations are lacking, there's really no end goal other than him being this fly on the wall, and that's pretty much all he ever is. And I feel like Shinji has always deserved, at the very minimum, the chance of being a good antagonist, which was never showcased throughout the story. All of these things supposedly stemming from the fact of his inferiority complex, him not being born with proper magic circuits, so there's not really anything that he can do, and him being under the care of Zoken. By law, you can't find anybody worse to be your caretaker and some form of guidance. If he was screwed up already, then Zoken is just gonna make it 100 times worse. That's fine, but that still doesn't spare the fact that there was never anything that leaned into him being someone that's worthy of redemption. To make this very clear, Shinji as he is a disgusting character. There's really nothing to say about the way that he comes off in the story, even if you were to consider the old friendship that he had with Shiro, that he wasn't always meant to be this way, and that back in the day, Herder, he used to be somewhat of a decent person. That doesn't help any of that. So I'm looking at this in a way of, I've always wanted to find an avenue, at least in my mind, that could have made him that character that was worthy of redemption. Because I know a lot of people love to point out things like the extroverts, and I remember years ago people touting, oh, just read Extra, just check him out in Extra, he's so much better there than he was in Fate Stay Night. But it's not the fact that he's better in Extra. No, that's not the case at all. If you actually read Extra, it's more so of the bar was so low in Stay Night that him just being a halfway decent person in Extra apparently sets the tone for him being an okay character. And I just can't get down with that. That's whack. He's not a good character in Extra. He's just not as shitty as he was in Stay Night. He's still an asshole. He's still a smart aleck. He lacks the proper charm to make you cheer for him. And there's nothing that extends beyond what he had going on in the original canon that makes you feel like, wow, this guy really turned a new leaf. To the point where even one of his most redeemable acts, that being where he sacrifices himself for the main character, even then I have a hard time finding this to be any sort of realistic when you think about literally every other variant of Shinji, and none of them match up to a person that makes you feel like, oh, I feel so bad for him, what a sacrifice. Nah. It's more like, at least you didn't go out as lame as you did in literally every other variation of your character, is more so what I feel like. So to dive further into what I've been building up to, because I needed this groundwork so this video doesn't turn into a meme, Buttery goes into greater detail. He says, I'm not saying let's glorify Shinji's actions or really make him a victim. He is, but he's also a bastard. Absolutely. I just find the idea that these two, him and Shiro, being apparently friends that were so polar opposite, really interesting. Like if Nasu delved into their relationship, how would they challenge each other? How would Shiro's hero complex come into play? Would this just be the Heavensfield Plus route? And to what he's saying, I'm thinking about what we could have done to save Shinji's character and make him a lot more balanced than he's been portrayed in the story. Because that's what a good antagonist is. They're balanced. You get it. You may not agree with it, but you get it. There's nothing to get about Shinji. There's never been anything to fight for. There's never been a situation where you see him fighting for his goals. What is his goals? If you really had to answer that question, what was Shinji's goal throughout the entirety of the story? You can't tell me because there never was one. It was always him trying to make up for his inferiority complex in any way imaginable. But there never was any real goal for him as a character. And I think one point where we can start at is his inability of being a magus. For example, you think about Karya. After we've had discussions about him, your opinion on his character may lean either way, but at least you can. With Kirei, flat out psychopath, but at least he has mental illness and he's not a coward about it, and he's competent. Zoken, relentlessly vile throughout the entirety of the story, but at least he started with good intentions in mind. There was never any good intention with Shinji, and I think this starts with having a route where he has some way of fighting for himself that doesn't lean on everybody else. I would love to see a Shinji route where he played as a protagonist on the opposite side of Shiro's spectrum. The story might bounce back and forth between the two, very similar to how the story was from the perspective of Rin when it first started. I've always felt like that would have made an interesting route for her. But we give the focal point of Shinji. The problem with that is a few things. You would have to purge the background of Shinji, because going back into the idea of making him as vile as you possibly can, like trying extremely hard to do it, nobody's rooting for a predator. So you have to find a way to take that out of his background and put something else there. The things that he did with Sakura can't exist. The things that he entertained with Rin could exist, but I'd rather it not. I'd rather you not give focus to that at all. Zoken does plenty of that on his own. And we've already been through the idea that Nasu had this heavy hand with this behavior with a lot of characters. Shinji just happened to be one of those victims to it. You find a way to make Shinji a magus that doesn't involve his background and him having this faulty circuitry. But in order to do this steps on a lot of ideas. For one, there would have to be a new evil, because without him being the direct evil, well then it doesn't make everybody else look as good, right? And that's the entire point. The balance. Every time I see him in the story, I know he's just there to make everybody else look better, never himself. And that's very strange because usually everybody is redeemable. I've never seen a character like this, and if I did see a character, it made sense. It doesn't make sense that Shinji is this irredeemably evil, especially when he had ample opportunity to stand up and fight for himself, and he literally just chose not to as a character because of the way he's written. So I want to see a route where Shinji actually tries to create something for his own, and the story allows him to do that in an uncontrived way. Beyond him not being the only evil, there's the fact that in order for him to thrive as a character, that would also change the dynamic of other characters. For example, for him to not be a predator would make Sakura's arc make a lot less sense, right? Because she has no legitimate reason to push herself over the edge in Heaven's Feel unless you make it strictly catered to Zoken. So yeah, to what Buttery was saying, it could end up as a Heaven's Feel plus route. It very well could, depending on the way that you handle it. There's another avenue where you could entertain the idea that he tries the same thing as Karya, but we already saw how that turned out, right? We've already been through that arc. There's no him actually becoming a student of Zoken's magecraft because it will literally drive him insane, and then his character will be lost to the dam in that way as well. He'll still end up evil, and it won't be like Karya where at least you have that aspect. He was so-called fighting for Aoi, and he was so-called fighting for the children. Shinji has nobody to fight for. In his eyes, all he has in that house is himself. What was supposed to be his natural heir position is being stripped away from him by a girl that he doesn't even know. And so going back into that inferiority and him trying to achieve that dominance over her, that's one of the few things that makes sense. Is it right? No. Do I prefer it? No. But it makes sense. I would much more prefer an actual situation where he could get his own servant. I know a lot of people entertain the idea of him being the pseudo servant of Perseus, because there is the bit in Hollow Ataraxia where even Medusa mentions that he's a lot like Shinji but with much more redeemable qualities. And if you guys don't know, Perseus has already been a servant. He was a servant in Fate Prototype. So Perseus would be to Shinji what Medusa is to Sakura, that guiding figure. So I honestly wouldn't mind seeing a war where it's exactly like what they did with the other characters. You give them less focus and give Shinji more focus, the same way you did for everybody else in the story, where he's not this predator, he's not this abuser, he's trying to find ways to fight against Zoken, and he spends his entire life studying to do so the same way that Shiro did. And see, that's the thing about these two characters, him and Shiro. They're very alike because of these horrible backgrounds. Shiro could have very easily ended up like Shinji if he chose to be a coward and didn't focus on his goals. But at least in Shiro's case, with him being the main protagonist and all, the story threw him a bone, right? He got Avalon, he got his affinity to swords, he stuck to that, and he always threw something against the wall until it finally worked. And all of his hard efforts were rewarded. I want to see the same thing from Shinji, but from a different perspective. I want to see Shinji fight against Zoken, maybe even to free Sakura. I want to see him get back at Zoken for all the things that he's done to his entire family, especially his mother. I want to see them dive deeper into his mother and exactly who she was, and give him a reason to fight, give him a reason to be an actual character and not a plot device for everybody else. That's something that I've always wanted. Maybe even give him Perseus. And for this route, I kind of want Sakura to completely take the back seat and give him more of that heroic element where he's fighting for her stead. Even though there's this contention in his mind about her taking his spot, It's not enough where it goes into abuse. As a matter of fact, I want to see him be a man about it. I want to see him confront her about these things, but not from a perspective of, hey, look at all these things that you took away from me. It's more so of, I hate it had to be this way. I empathize with your situation, but I gotta find a way to take back my former spot. I'm gonna find a way to get you out of here. But here's the problem with that. It will be very difficult for him to do this as well when you consider that Zoken is inside of Sakura at all times. So any heart-to-heart moment that he even tries to have with her, well, then Zoken knows what he's up to. And that makes it all the much harder and more unrealistic for him. So this is something that has to be revealed towards the end of the story, towards a position where he finally knows that he'll get rid of Zoken for good. And that way, he's not putting her through anything in the process. As a matter of fact, that could be his saving grace. Sakura still goes into Dark Sakura in that route, but it's over Shinji. Shinji puts his entire life on the line as a character to get Sakura out of the position that she's in, and that's his heroic element. It'll be very similar to the way that Jason sacrificed himself in his rendition of LB5. I mean, literally, except Shinji deserves it way more than Jason, and he's been handled way more improper. And that's really important because, like I said, even if you look at the Fate Stay Night manga where Shinji isn't raised by Zoken, he still ends up just being an asshole. There's nothing endearing about that. So a Shinji route for me, I want him to be a lot more intelligent. I want it to show his charm and his charisma, because though it may not seem like it, beyond the character he was very well liked among the people in the school, and you can bounce off of that into his main plot line. I want the story to throw him a bone the same way the story threw Shiro Avalon. I want the story to throw Shinji something that he can work with. I want him to work just as hard as Shiro did, but in a different way. As I keep saying, the story just constantly set him up for failure. I still want him to use the book that Zoken gave him, maybe even use his own intelligence as a method to hijack the contract from Sakura in his own way. Give him a servant like Perseus, or a servant that would better reflect his character. Have him sacrifice himself, of course, as a toast to him and Shiro's old friendship before he descends into a place where he can't return like he did in the original canon. The sacrifice also being catered to Sakura. And it doesn't have to be all about him. This could be a side plot point. And we know that Natsu's capable of doing this because he's done it before multiple times. Shiro can still be that guy at the end of the story. Just let Shinji be a part of that. And she goes into Dark Sakura over Shinji, and she gets Zoken out of her body that way, so it's still realistic. Maybe not one for one the way that she did in Heaven's Feel, but she still does it. Shiro still saves her. But it can't be Heaven's Feel, because the main reason that Heaven's Feel works is because the characters are written the way that they're written, Shinji included. It has to be a whole different route entirely.